give me the timeline on Kristi Noem, who, by the way, is like a screaming neocon and sort of a conventional liberal posing as a conservative or whatever. I mean, I've had a lot of problems with Kristi Noem over the years. Makes me sad that people bought her bullshit. But what happened to Kristi Noem makes me think that Americans are really nice people, actually, it turns out. And that was reaffirmed for me. But describe what happened.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, she's always been an obvious lightweight. I mean, she got it, like, elected to the House in South Dakota, working her way through the political system. And then from that became governor. And I think people attributed to her a lot more talent and substance because of that than she actually had. So she was never like an impressive force at all. She's a very like mindless kind of herd animal who just follows whatever dominant ideology she has to embrace in order to advance her career.
That's right.
But I think her calculation was this kind of culture war calculation that if she talked about what she perceives to be these like farming values, that it was going to provoke the disgust and anger of the liberal elite, and that conservatives would rise in her defense and say, no, these are the kinds of traditional values that have been lost and that the American liberal elite are too divorced from. The problem is that not putting bullets into the skulls of puppies in order to kill them because you hate them isn't just a liberal elite value. One of the things that has happened is that Americans love their dogs for a lot of really interesting reasons. I think it gives people a sense of spirituality, of connection, all the things that have been lost when we now live in cities and work in cubicles. Like, people crave this kind of connection. People don't have children. They don't, like, across the political spectrum, and dogs open people up. Dogs have evolved to love and be loyal, trusted companions of humans, and humans to dogs. It's a very deep bond developed over thousands of years of evolution. So there's a lot of things she could have done that might have worked in that way, but talking about how she pumped this puppy's skull full of bullets because, quote, I hated that dog, is something that provoked almost universal contempt. And that gave me a lot of optimism. And it was even a worse story. Like, if you listen to her audiobook, she has an audiobook where she tells the whole story. She shot the dog, but didn't kill it. She had to go back to her truck while the dog was suffering and from a wound. She had to then kill it with a second shot. She then took a goat, like minutes later, that she also hated because she said it smelled and was mean, put him in the same gravel pit and murdered him. And then she tells the story that her brother and her uncle, or I think that's two close relatives, said when she came back, we heard about this like rampage of animal slaughter that you went on. We're going to get out of here before you shoot us. And this was in her book that she read in her own voice. Like, even the members of her family thought she was like a psychopath, to the point where she was being endangered. They were endangered because she was off on some like murderous rampage. And how she thought that would engender any sympathy for her of any kind, rather than making her look like this deranged monster, is completely beyond me.
Well, she was trying to pose as some sort of rural hunter or something.
Exactly.
And as someone who actually has bird dogs and hunts them a lot, it was preposterous. Like, she has no idea what she's talking about. She shot the dog. She killed her own puppy because the dog chased and killed chickens. Now, it's a bird dog.
Right.
Chickens are birds.
Its instinct is to do that. That's why you get those dogs.
Of course. And the idea that this is like common in rural America, it's shooting your bird dog?
It's defamation against farmers. Like, farmers just go around like repeatedly murdering their dogs the minute that they don't like their personality. She could have obviously given it away to all kinds of animal rescue groups. There were all sorts of things she could have done. But I do think it was that calculation, but it was a huge miscalculation. I do think there's like this legitimate conflict between, East Coast cosmopolitan liberals and people in like more traditional farming communities, and that's a real issue. But it's not about murdering your dogs. And then
it's cruelty masquerading as strength.
Well, I think
cruelty is not strength. Strong people are not cruel at all. Why would they be? Strong people are compassionate, actually.
Right. I think the need to inflict gratuitous suffering or death on others is a sign of extreme physical and moral weakness. And this is why you see all these people in Washington, neocons like Bill Kristol and David Frum, but then also like people like Lindsey Graham. And you see this in the British commentariat where, they had this empire that they've now lost. There's this like weak, broken, impotent, irrelevant, marginalized empire, and they speak about the glories and importance of war more than anybody because it's a way that they feel strong and purposeful. And you have all these people in Washington who constantly, whatever war is proposed, immediately embrace it because it's a way that they get to feel strong themselves, like compensating for the internal weakness and cowardice that they have. I mean, if you live your whole life and you never display moral or physical courage, you know that about yourself, it pains you. And instead of then doing something that requires courage, you instead send other people to go risk their lives in a war that you cheerlead. It's like such a psychologically warped way of finding it. It's like stolen valor. It is obviously courageous to go and fight in war for cause, but not to send other people to fight in a war for cause. That requires no courage at all. But that is the kind of courage that in Washington, people constantly embrace in lieu of actual courage. It's really like a psychological pathology, and it's so transparent.
The weaker the leader, the more arbitrary and cruel to other people the leader is.
Yeah, and you see it on the interpersonal level too, like the way, people who treat people who have less power than them, who have less influence than them, who have less control. There are a lot of people who abuse those kind of people, and it's almost always because those people are weak, and that's the way they feel strong. People who are secure in their own strength treat everybody, as you say, compassionately. I think that extends to animals as well.
How many dogs do you have?
26 at home, and then realizing that was unsustainable, we then started this shelter where we have another like 200 or so.
Why do you have so many dogs?
It just happened organically. I mean, both my husband and I love dogs. We started rescuing dogs. And then, I remember when we had 5, we were like, no, 5's our limit. And then someone calls up and says, oh, I just found 2 dogs that were hit by a car on a street and they need, surgeries or they're going to die. They're suffering. And we were like, okay, let's take those because what's the difference between 5 and 7? And then you're like at 7 and you're like, yeah, what's the difference between 7 and 9? And then that's how you get to 26 dogs. But, they're all rescue dogs. They're all dogs who have been found on the street by us usually, but also by friends who are in various states of distress. Lots of them have been abandoned. They're like, petrified and traumatized and abused. And when you have, the ability of like the blessing of financial security, you can use it for pure material consumption, just buying more things, trying to get another house, a private plane, whatever. Honestly, it just provides me with no happiness or satisfaction at all. It really doesn't. It just doesn't do anything for me. And the ability to use it to help those in need gives me so much more happiness and gratification. You can almost say it's like a selfish endeavor because it just provides me a happiness that other things don't. And, also like when you have a shelter, there's nothing more beautiful than connecting a dog with a family and then hearing like 3 months later about how the dog is integrated into the family's life and seeing pictures of that dog laying on a sofa, with this family when they had been on the streets of Rio de Janeiro, like virtually dead from starvation or from disease, and you nurse them back to health, and then you place them in a family. Like you have to figure out what are the things that actually give you meaning and purpose and happiness in life. And oftentimes they're not the things that society tells us are the things we should strive after. And that was a lesson I had to learn by chasing all the things that society teaches you're supposed to chase. And then when I grabbed them and I thought it was going to make me happy and found it actually made me more vacant and emptier, then I knew that I had to find the things that actually gave me happiness. I think it's one of the most important lessons you can learn.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.